Good morning, Matthew Ferguson, or Matt. Thank you so much for agreeing to participate in the UCSD Go For Veteran Legacy Project. Today's date is July 21st, 2020. I'm Catherine Buckley, and Dr. Beatrice Golomb is also on this call, and there's a chance that she'll ask some questions as well. We are so thrilled to talk to you today. And to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's good to meet you, Catherine. Dr. Golomb has helped me immensely over the course of the last several years with dealing with the VA. She unknowingly did it, but she provided me with quite a bit of assistance with knowing what my problem was and how to get the help I needed. So very much appreciate it, because when there's a lot of different, well, it looks like fibromyalgia, it's a combination of things. Syndrome seems to be the same. I'll go back a bit more. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I joined the Army Reserves halfway through my senior year. And it seems to be mostly because I was, I'm sorry? Of high school, correct. So of high school, right. So 1986, I graduated high school. Halfway through my senior year, I joined the Army Reserve, and I had a long history. Almost all entire male line had served at some point, and so I kind of felt the obligation. And I went into the Signal Corps the summer right after, so 3 weeks after I graduated high school. I was at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for basic training. At the time, we'd call it Fort Lost in the Woods, because it was right in the middle of nowhere. Survived that, and graduated on a Thursday, flew back to Albuquerque on a Friday, went to San Diego on Saturday, and started community college on Monday. So that was fairly tricky. My mother moved to San Diego over the summer, and I didn't want to stay in Albuquerque anymore. So 18 years was enough. So that was the several years I did several different things as a reservist in the Army. I was in Signal Corps, I was in psychological operations, and ultimately became in transportation. It's the denomination, or the title, Transportation Management Coordinator. That was 88 November, 88N. And that is someone who's a trainer. Basically, what we did was taught people how to organize their equipment and load everything on their trucks, and then put their trucks and tanks and everything on planes, trains, and automobiles. So, and that I went to community college a couple of years, transferred into UCSD, and my senior year of UCSD. So that was the year, that was 1990, and Saddam Hussein went across the berm. I went, I remember vividly, it was a Wednesday in the middle of the week, I think the middle of November, and my unit called and said, pack your stuff, show up on Saturday morning at 5:30, we're leaving. Pretty much how I expected it. Didn't expect it then, though, because, yeah, it's the Army's way of doing things. So my unit was called active duty. The way my unit worked was there was only 3 of them in the Army at the time, and they were all in reserve. So they called 2 of us to active duty and left one. I'm not sure if they were going to leave them stateside, or I'm not sure whatever happened to the 3rd unit. But there's one on the East Coast and West Coast, and so we handled the West Coast and states in between. It was fairly eventful, but not outrageously unexpected. And I had already sworn to do my duty. I'd made an oath. We had already, there's been quite a bit of propaganda for a couple months before that, so it's kind of like preparing me. And I have a degree in political science, so I know exactly what they were doing. I know about game theory. In fact, I use it all the time, and in my daily life job. And so I understand motivations that they put in us, and it worked for me perfectly. I was 21 years old, sergeant in the Army, and being sent all around the country to teach units how to load up their equipment. And then ultimately I was sent to our unit. We thought we were going to stand down, but the very large 1st Infantry Division and several other large units in Saudi Arabia liked what we did so much they wanted us to come out there and help them go back. So they extended our time on active duty, put us in a plane on, I think it was April 14th, and we hit Saudi Arabia on April 15th and started to get to work almost immediately. So that's kind of the background.
Yeah, thank you. Once you got there, what were some of your functions and roles? Feel free to tell us about your duties, if they were any different from the ones you were doing stateside, and how long you were deployed in the Gulf.
So they were for the most part, same duties I did statewide, with a little bit of difference in that the Army had recently acquired 20-year-old technology called barcoding. And this was the first time we used barcodes to actually mark vehicles, put them in a database and know where they're at any one time. It's always stunning to say, why am I using equipment that grocery stores have used for 20 years? But okay. And what I did, though, is the same thing. We went out into the desert and we would go, I should go back. My unit, because it's a training team and we deal with all levels of an organization, generally in the Army, that means you have to have various ranks. So we were generally, our units were 3 sergeants and 3 officers, which is, so we're a small team, and we'd like to think of ourselves, that's how Special Forces works. But we put that in the back of our head, but for the most part, we were trainers. And, but it was a very unique system that's you see it nowhere else. So there were 2 sergeants and sergeant first class, and there was 2 captains and a major. And the 6 of us were a team. There were 10 or 12 different teams. So my entire Army Reserve unit only had 2 privates. Everybody else was sergeant above. There was 2 lieutenants, and then a dozen captains, 6 majors, lieutenant colonel, and a full colonel. Weirdest thing you've ever seen in the Army, but it kept things interesting. So our team, the teams were named after alphabetical letters. So Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. We were Team J, which is Juliet. And, we're big husky brute, big men, that type of thing. Throughout Team Juliet, we can't take that, so little boy things that the Army kind of inspires. And so what we did is we changed the name to Jack. And so we were Team Jack. And we arrived in Saudi Arabia, Dhahran, which is on the east coast of Port City. They housed us an oil field worker platform on the ocean. It was docked. It was docked, but it was a small little rooms that oil field workers would use, that they could tow it out to an oil rig or something of that nature. And the delight was that it had an air conditioner in it, and you could keep the temperature just around 90 degrees, which was pretty fantastic at the time. They kept us moving a lot. We were sent out. One of the first things we did is flew from Dhahran to King Khalid Military City, which is kind of in the middle northern part of Saudi Arabia. And they put us on a C-130, which I had never flown in before. It's a medium-sized cargo aircraft. It's been around for 70 years, something. And half the guys in the unit were getting on the plane said, yeah, the last time I was on this thing, we jumped out of it. And the other thing they said is that if it's not leaking, it's empty. Don't get on it. It won't fly. So it was leaking everywhere, so it was good. Anyways, they flew us out to King Khalid Military City, and from there we would have 2 or 3 day trips out into the desert where these American units were located. For instance, the 1st Infantry Division was out there. We would go, the officers would go talk to the officers. We were the sergeants. We would go talk to the sergeants and get them up to speed on what we're there for, how we're going to get them home as fast as humanly possible. And if they cooperated and did these things in this order, in this way, then everything will go smoothly, and that just makes it so much better. And so we did that for a couple months, and we lived in a hole in the desert for a bit. Basically, what we called digging a hole in the desert, put a tent over it. It was never quite like that. I think I always had a pallet with a tent over it. But there was a couple weeks duration over about 3 months where we were out in the field and camping, and to go out. Daily thing that we did was again meet with the sergeants. They put their team together, and my famous speech is that this was loading about 100 tanks, and tanks are driven to the battlefield. They're too expensive to let them drive too far on their own. And so they have to be put on heavy equipment trucks, which is called a HET, so a HET. And there's a big long line of HETs. And so I got up on one tank, and it's the M1 Abrams, and it's very striking. And standing on it, felt all powerful. It was pretty neat feeling. And I told go into my standard speech. I am Sergeant Ferguson. I am here to teach you how to put that tank on that HET over there. I'm going to do the first one. You're going to do the other 99. Here we go. Let's get started. And so the training began, and within two days, 100 tanks on these heavy equipment trucks, and they were headed back down to the port to get back on the ship, because tanks are heavy and they don't fly them unless absolutely necessary, and then only one at a time for the most part. So these are just the first infantry divisions. One part of their unit had 100 tanks. And so we were out in the desert doing that. When we were in Kinkley Military City, they had some very interesting barracks. They appeared to be, where we were at, it appeared to be a very luxurious hotel prior to the military getting to it. So it was all marble, all glass, incredible, except there was no furniture or anything else like that. So we had all the fun Army accommodations of cots and folding tables and things like that. But we had air conditioning, and so that was a bonus from having been out in the field day in, day out. And so it was tough out there for the heat. I'm from Albuquerque, so I was used to it. It was lucky for me because I spent, when I was there in Saudi Arabia, it didn't feel any different than being out in the high deserts of my home. With the exception of, I generally wouldn't be out in 120-degree heat, and that was pretty much daily occurrence there.
The next section is about your exposures and your experiences. So what do you remember about some of the exposures from your deployment, including any drugs you were given, chemicals you were around, environmental toxins you were exposed to?
So being in the military, you're around a lot of equipment, a lot of solvents, gasoline, diesel, aviation fuel, and everything used to make those work. And honestly, we didn't think about them at all because it was just part of the background. So if you can probably name it, if a vehicle used it, a plane used it or something, I experienced it, whether it was exhaust or a fluid or a solid or something like that. A splash of battery acid that ruined a uniform of mine. I had to go get another one, which was kind of as a side note, one of the joys about the Army in the field is that if you need something, you just walk over to whoever has it, and they got a desk there, and it's like, yeah, I splashed battery acid on my jacket here. Can I get a new one? Sure. What size? There you go, and walk away. It's a huge procurement problem when you're in base in the U.S. So there's some interesting aspects to it. But for your question, the first thing that I remember specifically about being exposed to anything inorganic was when sitting outside in Dhahran one day early on, I would notice these dark specks appear on my skin. And if you rub them, you realize it's ash. And so those specks were small, like the size of a grain of sand. And if you you rubbed it, it was kind of like taking a pen or a pencil or something like that and making a mark in your skin. And that was from oil field fires. And that was, so the prevailing winds must have been blowing south from Kuwait. And this was, we didn't see any smoke per se, but we had some of the, what I called at the time, fallout. And I was not a popular person using that term. But when we got there in Saudi Arabia, all the fighting had been over. We had been issued sidearms just in case, but there was no battle to be had. There appeared to be no threat. We were never harassed or anything like that by the locals or the enemy or anything of that nature. At one point in time, we had to go to Kuwait to help a unit there, train them, load their things, and we drove through oil field fires, and that is a very unique dystopian thing to experience. Thought I was right coming out of the set of Blade Runner. Dark skies, oil field fires, burning in the distance. Being interested, we drove up to a couple, got within 100 yards or 200 yards of them, and see what was what, take some pictures and move on. But those were all, we were exposed to all kinds of different kinds of elements that come out of raw oil or crude oil, right? Because crude oil is much different than when you put in your car gasoline or something like that. So it was everything. And it was keeping you clean during that time was actually pretty difficult. There's other regular type things. There's pesticides. The army tents that they use are old fabric, thick fabric that had anti or water repellent type things, bug repellent type things in it that they stink like hell. And I know that years later, they said that there were some other things going on where they captured chemicals or something else like that, and they would go dig a hole in the desert, burn it, and then put the hole, cover the hole up. And I don't know if I experienced any of the fallout from that. I never saw it myself. There was, and at the time, even there wasn't even any rumors that we didn't even know about that until many years later. The striking part was that some of the units that were in Kuwait early and captured a bunch of Iraqi equipment. So I take it back. That was actually the second Gulf War, where they did find chemical weapons that Iraq had, and they were the chemical weapons that we had provided Iraq during the late 70s when they were fighting Iran. So thought that was, being a political science person, then understand dynamics. It was strange to go fight in the land for something that we had given to someone else that they were threatening to use on us. So,
just to clarify, it sounds like you had some oil fire smoke exposure, although not as much as those that were sort of stationed closer to that. You mentioned that the tents that you were in had sort of repellent, I guess, chemical on them that may have been both water repellent and also perhaps insect repellent, and not maybe directly exposed to the burn pits. You mentioned pesticides, but didn't really allude to whether they were used in your area or not.
The pesticides, I think pesticide is probably the wrong word. It was like a mosquito repellent or a bug repellent type thing. And so they had several different kinds. We didn't come into contact with bugs that much, but we were told to use it, and so we used it. And it more smelly than what we used than here. It didn't smell like DEET. It smelled like something much more chemical based. If that's possible. Yeah.
And then you were not, I guess, when did you arrive? What month did you arrive?
So it was April 15th of 1990.
April 1990.
1991, sorry, 1991. April 15th, 91. I was called up in November of 1990.
Okay.
We were in theater. We were in theater for about 4 months, and got everything out, and luckily they sent us back home.
Okay.
And then we were released shortly thereafter, and I got to go back and take my senior year all over again.
Great. And then no vaccinations to be deployed over there?
You had some vaccinations. They gave boosters. I have the records of them somewhere. I don't think there was one in particular that everyone said that was extremely painful and either was away that day or didn't
Probably
get it.
Probably the anthrax vaccine.
I don't know that we ever got anthrax vaccine. There was something else more related to malaria comes to mind, but it wasn't the malaria vaccine, right? But it was something of that nature. Mm-hmm. It was something to do with dengue fever or something in that part of the world. But we got a whole bunch. They loaded this up. Tetanus and other various ones as well.
Okay, great.
If I could pull the records out, I'll share them.
Okay.
Did you ever have to take any pills like the PB nerve agent pre-treatment in the
Did not. Did not, because we were there after any of that happened, and we didn't come across any of it. And I don't even think they had them, or if they did, they didn't have them where we could access them. And so most of my exposure came from the various kinds of fuels, whether it be diesel, gasoline, aviation fuel, a bunch of degreasers, other things of that nature, and then all the kind of fallout of different aspects of the oil field fires. So we had it on our boots and glunking hands, and at some point working on things because it would fall either in ash or sometimes kind of a very small liquid drop sometimes as well, depending on the prevailing winds.
Right.
So, Matt, when did you first realize that some veterans might be having health problems?
It actually didn't take that long. I was surprised how long it took. I think I was back in in the U.S. for about 6 months when I started coming down with various things that I did not expect to have. I was healthy, or if I thought I was healthy. I was active since I was in the military. I worked out a lot, probably every other day, and I was at UCSD going through my last year of college. My life wasn't crazy stressful or anything like that. I had a couple part-time jobs, but they all worked out. And I was experiencing headaches, muscle aches, and what I call kind of joint pain, but it was more felt like tendon than it did specific joint. And they also depressed. And it was very difficult to try and figure out why I was depressed when I was very happy to having returned from, my almost, it was about 10 months, I think, that I was on active duty. And this was January, where my service in the U.S. Army had just expired. So I started January 29th or 30th of 1986. January 30th, 1991, I bid everyone goodbye and I left, and I never looked back. So what?
January 1992?
Some of the symptoms. I'm sorry, January 1992. Yeah. That's when I graduated. This was halfway through my second senior year of college at UCSD. So 6 years as a reservist. Over that period of time, I spent almost 2 years on active duty, but none of it sequentially. So 10 months here, 4 months there, 3 months here, type of thing over the period of time.
So the symptoms that you mentioned, how did those evolve over time?
They got progressively worse throughout the second half of my senior year, so January 92 on, throughout the next 8 to 10 months. And then at some point graduating, going into a profession, I work in IT, and I've worked IT for just about every hour of my professional career. In fact, all of my professional career I've worked in IT. And those symptoms seemingly started to fade, but they would pop up every now and then, and so it would be reoccurrent. Also, and then other things would, over a period of time, would show up. And so I didn't know it at the time because I didn't know what asthma was, but I started showing symptoms of it about a year later, after I got back. And the symptoms weren't frequent, but there were some specific things that now I know are specifically asthma related. I think it was 95, 93, maybe it was 93, where the government started doing drug war health checks on people. And I had one of those done. And went into a doctor, they did labs, took my statement down, what my symptoms were, and sent me on my way. And I do have those records as well. Nothing significant from those that I could see. And so one of the things that was long-term and lasting was muscle pain with any sort of normal use. And I thought I was just sore because I did running and I swam and scuba dived and I worked out with weights, started yoga years later, and I was always sore. Thought that was normal. Found out many years later when I was unable, I had a shoulder injury and was unable to exercise, that, hey, there's no muscle pain if I don't do something that's just over walking fast, or something of that nature. And so some of I get back to your question, some of the symptoms ebbed and flowed. A lot of them were there up front, and then they would disappear, go away for a couple of years, something would trigger them, come back. And I, for the most part, went to multiple doctors for individual things. I don't think I was treated for the multidisciplinary aspect of the conditions that I had until much, much later, almost until about 2010 when I was diagnosed with ADHD. And I did not know I had ADHD. And looking back, I could definitely see parts of it. And part of how I was treating myself with ADHD was with endorphins. And so being able to use, being able to do exercise and get to the endorphin phase kind of satiated the ADHD, but also tore apart the joints and muscles in my body. And so there was a point where the muscles and joints of my body said, can't do it anymore. I was trying to do the short triathlons. So they're called a sprint triathlon, and not too far, but it's running, biking, and swimming all in the same hour. And I got a shoulder injury. A year later, got a knee injury. A year after that, there was a Achilles tendon injury. And then ADHD came out pretty hard. Asthma came out pretty hard. And I finally was diagnosed and was given medication for ADHD. That was when I found several things over the course of years. Like, I haven't got better. I'm on meds for depression. That's fine, but there's other things, other physical ailments that I had, and I found a rheumatologist here in San Diego. And I learned the great thing about rheumatologists is that when they hear hoofbeats, they think penguins. Everybody had already heard, all the doctors who think that the medical doctors are special, no offense, Dr. Golomb, is that they are very nearsighted. And I found that even the doctors who, when they hear hoofbeats, they think zebras, you need someone who does differently. And then I was found to have all kinds of crazy things that I think some of them stemmed from my Gulf War experience. And I had developed gout over a period of time, or I was on the edge. I think it was on the edge of gout. Doctor said there was crystals forming in my toes and feet and stuff like that, though I hadn't felt it at the time. Then there was a couple other things. I always come back with dengue fever, but it's not anything like that. But it was, there were several chronic things that had lasted and I'd had for many, many years. One of them was lupus, and it turned out to be drug-induced lupus. And we've kind of narrowed it down to minocycline. And I was given minocycline quite a bit when I was in the Army, when I was in college later on, for acne and also for other, if I had some sort of skin infection, something from a cut or bruise or bite.
Were you using any other antibiotics that you remember? Sorry.
Yes, I had, and also same thing that came around the time that actually was in my basic training was in 1986, the summer of 1986. I went to signal school in 1987. That was in North Georgia, and that was where something developed, which took years to figure out what it was. But it was the word they use is folliculitis, and it actually took more than 15 or 18 years for someone to actually call it that. They went through all kinds of different things that they thought it was, and treated me with all kinds of other antibiotics or other types of skin topical treatments. And I was on Bactrim DS for almost 8 years to keep the extreme itch and the signs of folliculitis down. And it was after that many years on an antibiotic, I became, I don't know, not immune, but whatever bugs I had were immune to it. Not necessarily folliculitis, but other things you treat with Bactrim. And so we tried, so that was when I went on minocycline to try that one. And within 6-7 months, I was a wreck. Luckily, that was when I found the rheumatologist. He's a Dr. Schickman. He's in San Diego as well. He's in Carmel Valley. And he has a private practice and is not your average. He doesn't see anything as normal or standard. And even if you look at folliculitis, he looks much deeper for the cause or something else for it. Then we came out with quite a bit of things that we took about 6-7 years to resolve, and that was and then Gulf War Studies started up, and you guys recruited me and came in and found all kinds, even some other stuff with my muscles, the response rate. You took some muscle tissue, did exercise testing for some of your studies and things like that. That was enlightening as well because it brought up other issues. Specifically, the asthma was finally diagnosed, and that wasn't diagnosed until 2011. Officially diagnosed, although I knew I had some lung trouble, and I attribute that to being the oil field fires.
What has the impact of this illness been on your life and on your family?
Pretty significant, and in a subtle way, though. My children both have a genetic condition called cystic fibrosis. And so my ex-wife and I had we had the gene, we had one half the gene, and didn't know it for our first child. And he was born here in San Diego, luckily 11 weeks premature, had a complicated meconium ileus surgery the next day after he was born. He was 3.5 pounds and survived that. And I'll cut to the chase. He's just about to finish his first year of college at not Mesa. I went to Mesa at Miramar. So lots and lots of troubles and everything like that. And having these other issues regarding with pain, depression, ADHD, most of it undiagnosed, was very, very hard to deal with, and I think hard on my marriage. There was some statistic we were told very early on that somewhere between just above 90% of people who have children with special needs divorce. And it was pretty much guaranteed for us because I had special needs as well. All right, didn't thought I was normal, appeared normal for the most part, but didn't feel it.
So what kinds of attitudes have you encountered about your illness from VA doctors or from civilian doctors or anyone you've seen about this?
For the most part, the VA doctors appear neutral. They don't, as far as I can tell, I haven't seen someone who is all for finding something or all against it. It was more about, the facts, man, just the facts. It was about how it was. And that was my military experience, so I didn't expect anything other. I didn't ask anything different. I had a thought on some other treatment that I had. I think it was more around, it was depression, psychology, anxiety, things like that. That was taken much more seriously by my professionals that I had around me. I've had many years of psychological therapy, which has been helpful, fantastic, and been able to get off a lot of my meds, working through all these different issues. And my rheumatologist was really the one who keyed me into the brain and body will work against each other and try and rip everything apart. And so fixing one, just fixing your knee or your gout or something doesn't affect something in your head, and you need to find that too. And he was very helpful in directing me towards services that I could use. And I didn't go to very many doctors to apply anything towards Gulf War, and it generally wasn't brought up. And if it was brought up, it was just a note put in. No one saw me as crazy. No one saw me as anything unique that I could tell. So I met Dr. Golomb. Well, I haven't met Dr. Golomb, but when I started your program, that's when everything was taken very, very serious. So they were studies.
What were any initial attitudes about your illness when you came back or when you first experienced symptoms? What were the early attitudes and experiences there like?
My experience or other people who heard of my experiences?
Both, primarily your experience, but anyone else?
It was kind of hard at first to determine what the multiple syndromes were that I had, the multiple syndromes that I had. And it came together when I started reading, and probably it had to be 92, 93 when the government started getting reports of people having long-term health problems and muscle, tendon, joint type issues, skin problems, things like that. And I'm like, wait, they're describing me. And that was when I was able to go in and for the first VA, check with the doctor for the Gulf. They were, for their Gulf War observation study, I guess is what it was. And that kind of clued me in, and I kept that in the back of my head over a long period of time. But I wasn't discriminated for it. I wasn't promoted for it. It was, for the most part, fairly neutral, I think, except for the VA. And the doctors I came into, that's what I wanted to say. The doctors that I experienced and nurses they're professional. They were very neutral. Most of the dealings with the VA is through a website, a very cold website where you put data in, you put documents in, and rejection comes out. And so that kind of turns me off on the VA overall.
So leading off of that, what was maybe your worst or most negative experience with other people's attitudes surrounding your illness? Sometimes I had nothing serious. Sometimes I had disbelief. People said, "Oh, it's fake," and this was probably in the 2000s, around that time, or they didn't ascribe it to particularly something that happened to something I came in contact with, or the multiple things I came in contact with when I was in the desert, and also other places in the Army that the Army sent me as well. I don't have any severe negative reactions from people.
about any of that.
What about best or most standout experience?
It's hard to find someone who is negative, but it's hard to find someone who also wanted to, who went the extra mile to try and find out what happened. So I don't know that I had specific positive experiences other than going through the studies for the Gulf War syndrome, and that was the same time I was going through with my rheumatologist. That was when DNA was able to be sequenced fairly easily. So I have 23andMe account, Vanity Tree DNA, and was able to find other things that were separate. First of all, I did not know that the CF gene actually comes from a Jewish heritage that was unknown in my family. So it comes from my mother's side. I have about 13%. And so for the years, I used the genetic tracing and tried Ancestry.com and other things like that, and found someone in Prussia in the 1860s who appears to fit the bill for the CF gene that I carry. So I'm homozygous, right, for carrying delta F508, the most common cystic fibrosis gene. Also, I'm carrier of the gene for familial Mediterranean fever. I don't have it, but I have the gene itself, and luckily didn't pass that one on. So a lot of it was figuring out for myself, and the best experience I've had was in the last 10 years or so, being recognized that there is a problem. We don't know what it is. We're going to try and find it, whether it's studies through you, Dr. Golomb, or whether it's studies, actual crazy blood tests and other exercise studies that I had to determine things like gout or other musculoskeletal issues, or when I was diagnosed with asthma. And it's very strange that my lung function is lower than my children's lung function, and they have lung disease. That's always kind of a stunning thing that I experience.
Have any of the early attitudes around your illness evolved over time, and if so, how?
Internally or externally?
Maybe both. Start with internally and then and then externally.
My attitude has changed quite a bit from being clueless over the course of years to being a detective and putting all the things together with the help of the medical community around me. I never sought veteran care per se. I have my college roommate when I was at UCSD was actually a Navy reservist, and he and I both got called up within about 3 weeks of each other. But his unit went to what he says. He goes, my unit went to the Gulf as well, but it was the Gulf of Mexico. He went to Puerto Rico for about 4 months, and I give him a hard time on that. But he stayed in the reserves and ultimately did a tour in Iraq, did 2 tours in Afghanistan before he retired from the reserves after 30 years as a Master Chief. He's also an attorney and graduated UCSD along with me, and we both kind of commiserate on the difficulties we had, the things we didn't know about, whether they're physiological or psychological. But over a long period of time, I've been able to put some of those things together. So that's really, I think, where we're at. Did that come close to the internal? Yeah. I figured shit out. It took a long time, right?
Glad you did.
Not all of it yet, but still evolving.
It's a process. So maybe moving on to the treatment section, what were some of your high or low points in relation to illness and treatment?
Usually diagnosis was a low point, right? For the most part, being diagnosed with ADHD when I was 39 or 40, that was kind of hard. Go back and look and say, what the hell? And then find out that I was self-medicating through extreme sports or exercise, things like that. And then not being able to because I shredded the parts of my body. And so that awareness and that understanding kind of comes through on that one. I think there's two parts to your question. Can you do the second part?
A high point as well in relation to illness and treatment.
I think a high point too was the acceptance from not only my family but my friends. When, because one or two things doesn't add up to anything, but a half a dozen things adds up to fibromyalgia. And the people who I think are far enough along understanding that it's legit, it's fairly real. It's different for different people. Has different effects for different people. And that, so generally having friends and family who are intelligent and are also some of them in the medical community or have experienced medical issues, being open to the idea that their friend, their brother, their son have these has kind of a condition that you can't see, but affects you, and whether it's psychological or physiological.
Are there any battles that you've had to fight surrounding your illness or health journey? And if so, who were the main allies or foes in that?
So I think on the mental side, it's like there's some psychiatrists who over the years have been astute as not to just go and try random drugs and see what happens, not to basically throw a bunch of things out there. And so the psychiatry, some of the psychiatrists I found were very good. The general, told you my rheumatologist, but that was, you find the rheumatologist is at the end of the line as far as medical. I've been through a bunch of specialists. Had been through general practitioners, things like that. My mother was a holistic health person. She wanted me to go through that, but I only believe in evidence-based medicine, so that was a non-starter. Not that it could hurt, but certainly, if the placebo effect helps for a day or two, fine. But I know it's not going to help over the long term. And so, with kind of working through that over the course of my life was kind of how I put all that together, made it work, trying to make it work.
So you've mentioned many of these, but what measures have you taken? What treatments have you tried, and how did those work out for you?
That's hard to say. There's most of the treatments I've taken have been medication-based over a period of time. They were for specific type of illnesses. We talked about folliculitis, ADHD, and I came up, most recently came up with something, was it Epstein-Barr? And I had a blood test rheumatologist because he keeps going through, how are you feeling? He's like, I kind of feel this way. All right, let's try this. And found Epstein-Barr, and so I had to take 2 antivirals for about 6 months, and they're just terrible on your gut. So those are kind of some of the hard parts, but also getting the test results back. That they do PCR, so it's not something in a tube that they screw up. But getting the test results back, saying, hey, it looks like it's been resolved. Finding the antibody for was that was kind of the first time I'm like, oh, this shit's real. Oh, okay, now we're getting into the big leagues here. And luckily it wasn't regular lupus. It was specifically based on the usage of a specific drug, which is no big deal, and never have to have the minocycline again. So there's been other things too that are amiss. Cholesterol's all over the place, and one of my rheumatologist thinks it ties in somewhere, but he says really for the most part, you just got to get it down. I'm like, yeah, use exercise and eating right? Yeah, I can't do that anymore, at least with the exercise part. And the drugs for them, I have all the side effects when I take medication, for instance, from the cholesterol type things. But most other drugs, I very rarely have side effects. And so that was always, the cholesterol question was always kind of strange. And he's like, let me noodle on it. And this is a couple of years ago, and so we every year every now and then we check in. It's not deadly levels, but it's high. And so the high is high, the high is high, and the good is really good, and the bad cholesterol is mildly bad. So we're just letting it roll right now. But I guess those are some examples. There's more, sure.
Have you been involved in any treatment trials?
I have not, actually, no. Not for lack of wanting, but more for lack of something interesting coming along or something relevant. I'm open for it.
Do you have any heroes among other veterans that have been helpful on this issue?
So I'm going to give Beatrice credit where it's due. She awakened me that there's things out there that I need to go check out and work with. Barry helped me a lot with the VA because one of the low points was with the VA rejecting me. The first thing I went for was I had hearing loss, and mostly in my left ear. And I can contribute that to very large jet or engines or motors or something like that that I had experienced over my entire Army career, because almost everything was vehicle-based that I did, or generator-based or something. And they just rejected it outright. Did hearing test and said, no, can't prove anything. And so that was quite a low point. And coming in and going through some of the studies that Dr. Golomb had, that really perked me up. Being able, I think the thing that's absolutely helped the best is not keeping any of it in, keeping any of the information in or hiding it, is actually putting it out there. And I found it extremely useful to go talk to people, and they work in something. It's like, oh yeah, I was in the Gulf War illness, and they're like, isn't that fake? And I'm like, no, it did this, and this. She's like, oh, I knew someone who had that. They went to this clinic. I can't tell you how many times that happened. That the 6 degrees of separation thing happened in my favor just for being out there, just for talking to people about any my illness or my children's illness. So the best example I have is not for myself, but for my children. And cystic fibrosis is pretty terrible. But it's more terrible when you can't get medical care. And there was a thing in I think it was my son was born in 2000, so it was mid 2005, 2006 or whatever, where a doctor on the East Coast did a paper in the New Yorker about centers of excellence, and he used the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation because they were running drug trials and trying to get and putting out how physicians should treat CF. And what he found out, what this medical doctor and writer found out, was that when you find a center of excellence, what they do is hands above everything else. And why? And we're like desperately trying to get to the end of the article. At the time, we're living in the Midwest, and my wife at the time, and my son was 5, and he had all kinds of crazy lung infections and everything. Finding this information that in Minneapolis was the best CF center in the nation, we drove, but we literally got the closest, or the next appointment with them. We were there within a week. Everything changed after that. My son got so much. It was incredible. And so from that lesson, I go look for centers of excellence for kind of the illness and the ailments that I've had. Sometimes they're hard to find, and I tell people that the same thing. So when people help me and they say, hey, I heard about this thing and this doctor helped, trying to tell them, find a center of excellence. There are places out there that know more, even though they publish. They may not be believed, but their process and procedures help more than other type of clinics or something you go to. So sorry, not my experience, but my personal experience, but it was my familial experience.
I mean, it sounds like something that has really helped you finding those centers of excellence for both your family and yourself personally. And yeah.
Right. And being vocal about I'm in pain, right? And it's constant, and and type of things like that. If you've got issues, to put them out there. I found it a much better response from people around me, much quicker to find something that helps or someone to help it.
Absolutely. What message do you have for other affected veterans who may be having similar health issues?
So one of the adages that I learned in the military and forgot for a while and come back to is is never quit. Don't give up. Doesn't matter if you have a bunch of stumbles along the way, you feel like quitting, trying to find something to help you, just giving in. Never quit. That was pretty much it. The other thing too is working with trying to work with legislators and things like that to get the government to admit that there's a problem. That took 20 years for the government to admit, oh yeah, some people do have this issue, right? And we should do some more studies on it and find out. And when we're talking about Gulf War syndrome, there's other things too, like we go back in time, Agent Orange, things like that. And then so the other thing I'd say is find your brothers, find your sisters in arms, your brothers in arms, your sisters in arms, and seek them out, help them, let them help you. Find your supporters, and at the end of the day, be the leader. If you've had issues, put them out there. If you've had successes, put them out there. Failures, put them out there. Help people through it all. Most of all, it's I think where we're at right now, where I came in, is that I came from a volunteer force. I volunteered to join the military, and they pointed me to someone I had to fight, and it was kind of my time to fight back and reclaim that which the government denies, or which it is fake, what several politicians would probably call it.
What message do you have for healthcare providers you've encountered previously?
The interesting thing is I think I worked in healthcare for many, many years, and in IT. So I still do. I make electronic medical record systems talk to each other, and interacted with a lot of doctors and physicians, and it's usually the administration is the problem. I think doctors want to be helpful. They do everything they can, but you get 6 minutes with your patient, you can't do much. And so I talked to a few about how can you invent something to have more time with your patient. And so there's things like that. But for the most part, the medical people I come in contact with have been very good, but also distracted. And too much paperwork, way too much paperwork, too much cover your ass type of things. And, I have it in my line of work as well. Everything's documented. Have to. So it's kind of some of the issues I see.
Final question. What message do you have for healthcare providers who might be trying to learn more about Gulf War illness?
There's a lot of material out there now, right? And I think that the problem is trying to, with most healthcare practitioners, is that they want medical-based knowledge or studies or things like that, and they don't take the word of their patients at face value. And that was kind of some of the things early on, or they don't put things together that they would. I think that the best thing they could do to help Gulf War veterans would be A, talk to your peers, B, find that at Center of Excellence, talk to your peers there, and C, also go back and talk to some of the people who do studies on Gulf War syndrome. I like to tell them, stop watching the TV shows about it because it's probably lies. you need to go find those papers and journals out there and find some time to go dive into them. There's always good clues about who to go see and understanding it. I think with some of the issues, the primary issue right now is that with Gulf War, anything from the Gulf War is now it's becoming a geriatric disease. And so we have a whole new group of doctors and physicians to educate. I'm not looking forward to that one. So I'm 52 and got a few more good years, right? But going to be transitioning at some point in time, and I hate to have to go and educate them again. The hardest part is making them believe me, but none usually gets heard. So worked it out.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today.